Howdy, folks, and welcome back to another episode of TASB Talks, the podcast bringing you the latest happenings and insights into Texas public education. I'm your host, Matt Mitchell, Senior Communication Specialist here at TASB, and I'm joined by Kelly Rosti, Associate Executive Director of TASB Government Relations. And we are very pleased to welcome Boerne ISD trustee Rich Sena to the show. Thank you, Kelly. Welcome back. And Rich, thanks so much for being here.
Hey, it's a pleasure.
So before we kind of get into the meat of this discussion, I first just wanted to get a little bit of background on both yourself and maybe your district.
Sure. I've been blessed to be a trustee entering my 13th year on Boerne ISD's board. And ironically, I didn't serve on the board until my children were already out of Boerne ISD. They'd already graduated. But I'd been on a few committees like the Budget Committee and the Long Range Planning Committee, which planned for future growth. And then I said, well, what the heck? I'll run for the school board. But what really motivates me or drives me is my family background. I'm a first generation American, and my grandparents didn't make it past the fourth grade. They all four of them came from the same village in southern Italy, but they really pushed education. That was the meal ticket to achievement in America, to achieve the American dream. So of the many, many things that my parents taught me, one was always be grateful for the opportunity that you have in the United States, but also give back to the community and the nation that has given us this opportunity. So to me, serving on the school board seemed like a natural thing. I'd been involved in different district committees. Education's super important. It's a moral imperative that we educate our children. They're our future. And so I ran, and I've been on for my 13th year now. And I've always been politically interested or involved. And so as time went along, I would advocate in Austin, and serving on the TASB board of directors seemed like a natural progression because you meet people from across the state. I went through Leadership TASB about 7 years ago. It was an awesome program. Recommend it to anybody who's been a board member for at least a couple of years. It's a good experience. You meet wonderful people and you'll learn a lot. So just continuing to focus on how we can make our educational system better throughout the state.
And I'm glad you mentioned advocacy, because the reason we thought about having you on is, as we're recording here on June 25th, it's about 3 weeks ago now, you were here in Austin advocating at the Capitol. There was a House Public Education Committee hearing for House Bill 2. And so can you just tell us a little bit about how that experience was?
Yeah, it was a great experience. I love testifying at the Capitol. This time I was invited to testify, which means you get a little bit more time, and generally the legislators will ask you questions. And so it was really a good interaction. And the whole purpose of the hearing was to kind of do an assessment on House Bill 2. And I thought it was important to thread the needle in there, because you have legislators that may have different opinions on House Bill 2. One thing our board did, we do every session, prior to every session, is we adopt legislative priorities. And one of our priorities prior to the 89th session in 2025 was a teacher retention allotment. In speaking with legislators, they often say, well, we want to make sure the money gets to the teacher. Well, we agree. A great way to do that is to develop a teacher retention allotment. And that was super important because prior to that occurring, the average Texas teacher earned at least $7,500 less than the national average. So when you give a $5,000 or $8,000 raise to 5-year or longer teachers, $2,500 or $4,000 to 2 years or longer, that wiped out a lot of that deficit. So that was really important to us. So another feature of HB2 that we really liked was the allotment for basic costs, because our system of basic allotment and weights is a good system, and it brings a sense of equity to districts across the state, which is somewhat unique in America. Not every state operates the way that we operate that way. So districts with significant challenges are given the extra resources to deal with those challenges. But nonetheless, the allotment for basic costs, we all face the same inflation, whether it's property casualty insurance, transportation, fuel. And so the ABC was a good innovation. So whether it was that or the the teacher retention allotment, where the increase, well, it was a different bill that increased state funding for public school safety. There were a lot of things that we liked about it. But at the same time, in threading that needle, you have some legislators that may say, well, hey, we took care of school finance in the last session, 8.5 billion. We did our job. That's fine. Other legislators may say, yeah, but you still haven't caught up with inflation. And the reality is, if you go back to 2019, the inflation since then is almost 30% cumulative. Well, funding per pupil has not gone up 30%. And so the approach we wanted to use was thank the legislators for what they've done with the 8.5 billion allocated to public ed, but just make the point that we're not at the promised land yet. We still have ways to go. And we think that was an important distinction to make, because you have to deal with legislators of varying viewpoints.
And that was not at all your first time testifying. But you mentioned your background and your interest in engaging in advocacy over the years and how it's grown, and then being not only a Boerne ISD trustee, but then also serving on the TASB board puts you in a unique position to do a lot of that work. But you've also helped to cultivate a culture back home beyond even just your school board to get people involved and to get people to come up to the Capitol and testify and advocate on behalf of their local needs. Can you tell us a little bit about what that's looked like and some of the work that you've done?
Sure. Well, it starts with the legislative priorities that we adopt, we discuss as a board. And prior to adopting those, we actually meet with our local legislators and their staff to say, are these general themes things that you can support? Whether it's a teacher retention allotment, property tax relief. And people may say, well, why is a school board member advocating for property tax relief? Real simple. It's the largest property tax that a property owner pays is to schools. And a majority of your households don't have kids in public schools. And so we
And
want to be.
sometimes your employees can't afford their bills back home.
That's true. So you want to be responsive to your constituents. And in advocating for an increased share of state funding for public ed, you can both move towards adequately funding public ed while offering property tax relief. So, yes, so what we've done, it starts with legislative priorities, and we approved that as a board. And in the last session, what we did was various different trustees and community members traveled to different hearings of the Education Committee, both in the Senate and the House, to testify on behalf of priorities. And these are priorities that aren't unique to our district. They really could be for any district in the state, because there are over 1,200 districts, 1,000 plus public, and then the rest, public charter. So if you're going to be speaking to legislators, you want to speak from a global perspective and not just your own community. So we do that. But also in the last session, we got 36 volunteers, and that included 5 of our trustees, 4 from Comfort, and 3 from Blanco ISD. So we formed a Hill Country coalition, which was important because our state rep represents those 3 districts. One of our state reps, our state senator, represents those. So when you see multiple communities meeting with you, they're like, ooh, maybe we better listen to them. And they generally do. They're generally been very responsive. But what we did was, prior to that visit to the Capitol with the 36 volunteers, and by the way, we all chipped in money to rent a charter bus. So no taxpayer money
Oh, wow.
went to this advocacy. We don't want to get into trouble with the AG or anybody else.
Right.
We follow the rules, So we brought the 36 together on a Zoom training to train them on our legislative priorities, which, by the way, Comfort and Blanco adopted almost identical priorities. So we were all singing from the same hymnal, if you will. And we did a Zoom training and went over a primer on school finance, because it's a complicated issue, very, very complicated in the state of Texas. And we broke the 36 volunteers into 18 teams of 2. And we assigned each team of 2 10 legislators each. and their job was to pick up the phone and make a phone call and try to get an appointment with the staff and, if possible, the representative. But they're busy folks and they're in and out of the Capitol. So we probably had appointments with at least half of the legislators. We visited all 181.
Whoa.
I would say
that's
we-
a
it
lot
was-
of visits.
It was, and we did it by geography at the Capitol, so they weren't walking all over the Capitol.
That takes a lot of planning. How
It
did
wa-
you
Well,
figure
we got a
that out?
map of the Capitol, and we had to wait till the offices were assigned
Right?
to the representatives, which didn't happen until like January 8th, 9th, 10th,
Mhm.
11th. And our trip was on the 16th.
Oh gosh.
So we're hustling and putting together the maps. And then there was one row at in the extension where one could say, well, maybe some of these folks aren't viewed as being pro-public ed. So I sent the toughest team in there with very experienced group, and actually they were received very well. So sometimes people's perception of who would be viewed as pro-public ed or anti-public ed may not be accurate.
Yes,
You
we
know.
hear that frequently.
Give them the benefit of the doubt and communicate and state your case. So we did the Zoom training, gave them a packet of information. They made appointments, and I would say that we met between 30 and 35 state reps. The senators were not in Austin that particular week. So we did go back and visit those on the education committee for the Senate. But to have one-on-one FaceTime with 30 to 35 reps is quite a bit. And some of them gave 30 minutes, as much as 30 minutes to
Wow.
it wasn't just, hello, nice to meet you, see you around the block. They asked questions, they were engaged, including some that were perceived as not necessarily being friendly to public ed. Some of those gave our teams 30 minutes of time where there was real interaction. And we were able to focus on issues like increasing the allotment for school safety, increasing the basic allotment. Now, of course, there wasn't much of an increase in the basic allotment. The money really went to the teacher retention, which was fine, and the allotment for basic costs. So collectively, there was a good commitment that made it to public education. So
Let me ask you a question about the preparation. You mentioned that you did a Zoom ahead of this, which makes a lot of sense, and the way that you apparently worked through the logistics of even just navigating the Capitol.
That's so impressive. That
That
place is
is.
so hard to navigate. So to get that many people where they need to go is incredibly impressive.
That must have taken a decent amount of planning time prior to divvying up who's going to go where. How did you do the school finance explainer that you mentioned on Zoom? Did you bring in a CFO or did you have trustees who are really well versed in it? I know there's a few new ones in some of the districts that you've mentioned. How did y'all do that part of the prep?
we had a PowerPoint with about 7 or 8 slides basically describing the basics. And I would say most trustees were fairly knowledgeable, although there were quite a few fairly new, 2 years or less.
Mm-hmm.
But we kept it basic.
So it was doable for a new trustee to jump in.
I think so. I think so. In fact, one of them, he's now a TASB director out of Blanco. I think he'd only been on the board a year and a half.
I know who you're talking about.
Stephen Mackey. And I will tell you, Stephen knows a lot about school finance.
Yes.
He's done his homework.
And he stayed last session in one of the hearings. It escapes me now which one it was. It's a blur, but you know how it is during session. It's difficult when somebody lives far from Austin and they want to advocate in person and testify, but the schedule is nearly impossible if you're not an invited witness. It's really hard to tell somebody with any level of certainty what time you're going to get called up. So it was one of those days, and Stephen came, and it's like, well, the hearing starts at this time. And knowing that he was a newer trustee, try not to overwhelm folks so that they'll hopefully want to do more advocacy. And so we let him know this is the time it starts, but we really don't know when they will get to public testimony on this item. I think he was here for 14 hours, but he stuck in there. He stayed and he testified.
I spoke to him the next day and I said, what time did you get to testify? And I can't remember if it was 10 p.m. or midnight. It was late. And you think about it, you've got the legislators that are sitting there. for hours and hours, and their job is to listen to testimony. So I would advise any person testifying to be creative in how they communicate, have some fun, and whatever you say, make sure you can grab the attention because it's a long day.
It is a long day. It's also, I'm not going to derail us, I promise, but it's also a long day and a long week for the State Board of Education right now. They have similar meetings that go well past midnight. So I think today is Thursday, right? We're on
Thursday, June 25th.
So they all this week I think one night maybe they got out before midnight, but the others they've gone well past. So and then they're right back there at 8 a.m. the next day. So you gave a lot of good tips and tricks, and I think I'm going to circle back with you after this to talk about how you logistically divided up the capital and the extension, because I could use some help in that regard. But what advice would you have for trustees, whether they're new or experienced on their local board, for how they can get more involved in things like this?
Well, first, I would make the point that never underestimate the impact and power of advocacy. Your legislators want to hear from their constituents. They're elected officials, and for the most part, they want to remain elected officials. So having good relationships is really, really key. And that's not something you do just during the session. You have to do it prior to session, and develop relationships. Invite not just the elected official, but their staff out to your district. Take them on tours. There are many folks elected to state office that really don't necessarily have any experience in dealing with local public school districts. And when they visit, a lot of times they're surprised at a lot of the programs that we have. We have 3 state reps that represent a large or small portion of our school district. And one of them, who's based out of Bexar County, I think over time, the district didn't really focus on developing a relationship with the state rep who only had 20% of your district. But we felt it's important. And we invited him out. He's been out to our district a number of times and loves a lot of the programs, particularly in the career and technical education field, that he sees us do, and was surprised. In fact, he's trying to get his daughter to move into the district. And I'm trying to get you to move into the district, Kelly, you know?
Yeah, I should say, disclaimer, I live right on the edge of San Antonio and Boerne, and I love San Antonio. Boerne is also beautiful and has some decent backyard. So I'm always looking.
We're looking at a nice house for you. So where was I going with all this?
Well,
tips for trustees.
Yes.
Develop relationships, do it early, do it consistently, and develop friendships. And I think that's really, really key. One fun story with our state senator, who's a good friend. Many years ago, after I first got on the board, she made the point that, school districts have to be efficient. And I said, I agree. I said, do you agree, Senator, that government growth should be limited to the combination of population growth and inflation? She goes, absolutely. It's in the Constitution. I go, that's great. I agree. If Washington, D.C. had done that, we wouldn't have trillion-dollar deficits as far as the eye could see. That have a balanced budget. Well, what would you say if there was a governmental entity in your district that over the last decade is 17% funding below that metric? What would you say? She said, I would say they're both efficient and probably underfunded. Is that your district? I said, you're darn right, it's my district.
Wow.
And from 2006 to 2019, prior to House Bill 3, we were 17% under that metric, which amounted to $10 million.
Wow.
And how much did we pay in recapture that year? $10 million.
Oh my.
So people are paying property taxes thinking it's going to schools when the money leaves, 10 million left us. And so one of the things about advocacy is unless you're at the table, you're on the menu.
Mm-hmm.
And we felt in our case that we've been on the menu for many years. We have one of the lowest funded per pupil revenue dollars per student in the state. Because of the state funding formulas, and we don't argue with the state funding formulas, but that forces us to be efficient, which is one reason we like the ABC, because it treats every district, every child the same.
Mm-hmm.
So be at the table or on the menu,
Mm-hmm.
develop relationships, work on a legislative priority and review it with your legislators. Like I said earlier, can you support these themes? And I will tell you, when it came to teacher retention allotment, improving aid for school safety, property tax relief was yes, yes, yes,
Mm-hmm.
we support these things. And you don't get into specific dollar figures because that's the legislator's job. And the other thing I would recommend is put yourself in the shoes of legislators, because I remember talking to the former head of the current head of the Senate Finance Committee about 4 or 5 years ago, prior to the 2023 session, when there was a record $33 billion surplus. And I'm thinking, oh, public ed's going to get a good chunk of that, because we're about 40-45% of the state budget. So that's going to be a nice infusion of public ed, which we got $4 billion. We didn't get the proportional amount, but I said, it should be a good budget year. She goes, let me tell you, with all the requests that have come in from all the departments, it exceeds the 33 billion. And we also want to do property tax relief, which I think was 10 or 11 billion. So, the reality is, schools, even though we are public school advocates, the reality is the state legislators have to take care of water, transportation, healthcare, higher ed, border security. There's a lot of competing interests for the funding. And when you look at what happened in the 2025 session, there are public school advocates that grumble about the 8.5 billion. And I'm saying, well, there was 24 billion available. About 6 billion went to property tax relief. So now you have 18 billion net. And by the way, property tax relief was passed with overwhelming bipartisan support.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't a Republican, everyone voted for it. So you have 18 billion left, and the amount that was dedicated to public ed is about the percentage that we have of the state budget.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I think there needs to be gratitude for what was done, but to remind the legislators that that was awesome, but we're still X amount below that rate of inflation. Right. And what our district does, we are always looking for efficiencies. If we can save $1 here or $1 there, that's $1 that can go to the classroom. But even with that, it's still a challenge.
And I think everything that you mentioned with how your local school board and the community communicates your very specific issues while also bringing a more global perspective is important. I just want to note that while we have the TASB government relations team, and you've got lots of advocates who are not the boots on the ground, not the trustees, not, actually in the school districts, we are all, I would consider us to be very useful, but it is one tool in a bigger toolbox. And that strategy is incomplete if the local school boards are not also themselves actively engaging in the process, because we do our best and we carry the message forward from the TASB advocacy agenda. And, we're in the weeds on the day-to-day rules and things that are moving, but nothing is going to beat, as far as legislative advocacy, a local elected official communicating directly with their state delegation, state lawmakers. So I just would encourage more trustees and more school boards to get involved at the local level and engage directly with the process as you have.
Absolutely. And one other thing, TASB does a nice job with the grassroots advocacy meetings. And some districts say, well, it's an 80-mile drive or what have you. You should participate in that because it's a great opportunity to meet trustees from other districts, develop relationships, and give your voice as to what the main priorities of TASB should be during a legislative session. Now, at the EdCon conference every fall, usually Austin Region 13 always has the highest percentage of districts attending EdCon. And so we really made a push in Region 20
You sound competitive.
to compete with them. We wanted to beat them, especially since that year EdCon was in San Antonio. So we made a bet with them, with Mary Jane Hetrick And Lynn Boswell, from Region 13 says, "Hey, we're gonna beat you guys." Well, they beat us by half a point.
Oh, no.
So we still haven't. I still haven't cooked them this nice Italian dinner. I promised I'd cook them. So if you're listening, Lynn and Mary Jane, I still owe you the dinner. But the next year we didn't do a bet, and we beat them.
Oh, see,
point is,
incremental progress.
incremental progress. It's very, very key to get engaged, participate in NITCON, participate in the grassroots meetings. You were at our last one in Region 20. Docs has been there before. It's a good effort.
I agree.
Well, I think that's a great place to leave off here. Kelly, thanks for being here as always. And Rich, thanks for taking the time to come up this morning. We appreciate all the insights and feedback. And I think this will be really valuable to a lot of our listeners, especially our trustee listeners.
Good. Well, it was a pleasure to be here. And thank you for the work that you do. And thank you very much, Matt. And Kelly, it's a pleasure to work with you. You do a great job in advocacy for public ed. And, one final thought, a community can have great roads and great parks, but if you don't have a strong public school system, you can never be a great community. It is imperative, whether you agree with the voucher ESA system or not, what have you, at least 85% of the kids in the state are going to be in public schools. And it's imperative that we prepare the next generation for success. That's what my grandparents did for my parents. That's what my parents did for me. And that's what I did for my children. And I now feel like I have over 11,000 children because that's the number of kids in our school district. So educating our children for a better future is the way to go.
I second that.
Extremely well said. Thank you so much for being here again.
Very good.
And thank you all, as always, for tuning in. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, and you can watch us on YouTube. Thanks so much, and we'll see you all next time.
Very good.